going to say a little bit more about the Sakyadhita conference that I went to with Venerable Chodron and Venerable Chini. When was that? Last week? Yeah. I never ever thought to ask to go, and I really operate on the understanding of nothing ventured, nothing gained, but it just seemed to me like June is the time when the Abbey is so busy, we've got forest thinning to do, we've got noxious weeds to deal with, there's more guests here, there's lots of programs. So I never thought to ask. Just, it seemed like the answer would be obvious. But then in the fall, last year, Venerable asked me if I wanted to go, and my automatic answer was yes. So I went without any expectations. I didn't really know what this was going to involve. And it's a conference that happens every 2 years in a different place in the world. Usually it's in Asia. And this year it was the first time the conference happened outside of Asia in Australia. So I'm just going to say a little bit about this, and then I'll tell you some of my reactions to it. Day one of the conference was arrival day, and then there was an evening talk. Jetsuma Tenzin Palmo, who's the international president of Sakyadhita, gave us the welcome, and there were some performances from Australian people. I'd like to read to you from the book that we all received, words from Jetsuma Tenzin Palmo that really describes what this is about if you're unfamiliar with Sakyadhita. So she says, we would like to acknowledge the Gundagara and Darug people who are the traditional custodians of the land where the conference is being held. We would also like to pay our respects to elders both past and present. And so just that very first statement was really striking for me because a number of the presenters started off their talks, their papers with acknowledging the Aboriginal people who used to live in that land, and some still do. At our previous Sakyadhita International Buddhist Women's Conference held in Hong Kong in 2017, it was suggested that the next conference be held in a Western country so that Asian delegates could see how Buddhism can flourish and adapt away from its traditional homelands. For this reason, we selected Australia as the most suitable because although primarily a Western country, it also contains a large population of ethnic Asians, such as Vietnamese, Chinese, Koreans, Sri Lankans, and others. These communities have brought their religious cultures to this land, and the Buddhists have created temples and continue along their traditional customs and beliefs. At the same time, the Australian community at large has also discovered the Dharma and founded many centers and monasteries holding allegiance to the various Buddhist traditions in Asia. So this current 16th Sakyadhita conference being held in the scenic Blue Mountains of Australia is a historic occasion for us, since for the first time we are meeting in a country which contains both traditional and contemporary expressions of the Dharma. Appropriately, the theme of the conference is New Horizons in Buddhism, as Dharma adapts to the 21st century while maintaining its own integrity and meaningful traditions. So it was held in the Blue Mountains, and if you've never been to Australia, it was my first time. The setting was absolutely stunning. It's geography that I've never seen anything like it before. And it's apparently called Blue Mountains because there's so many eucalyptus trees, and the trees give off this oil that when the oil contacts the sunlight, it gives this blue hue. I don't think I really saw the blue hue because it was pretty rainy and overcast much of the time there, but it was just stunning scenery. So quite an extraordinary place to have this conference. So there were papers given every day by monastics and lay people. There were plenary sessions, there were workshops. There were 67 workshops to choose from over 4 days. Everything from kimchi making to the Abbey gave a little workshop on how to incorporate the 6 harmonies into creating community. So the choices were vast, just vast. And then there were 800 plus people there, all Buddhist practitioners, primarily women. And so that's what makes this conference so special. It's a place where women can come together, and there were men there too. Men are invited, but women can speak freely. They can speak from their heart. They can talk about the challenges of monastic life or just lay life, practicing the Dharma, and to be in a position where they're supported by, keen listeners and people wanting to know. So it was really an impressive gathering of people. I thought I'd share just a little bit about what the Abbey did at the workshop. It started off with a talk given by Venerable Children on the 6 harmonies. And then we did the rest of the workshop like a discussion group. So if you've ever been to the Abbey for sharing the Dharma Day or at a retreat, we have this format where you break into small groups, some questions are posed in a meditative sort of way, and then people share one at a time their reactions to the questions. So I think the questions that we posed were pretty juicy. The questions included, what are the advantages and disadvantages of practicing or living in a spiritual community? What values do you cherish the most in your personal and community life? What are your inner obstacles to living in or creating spiritual community? And what ideas do you have for bringing your wish for community to come to fruition? So interestingly enough, the target group for this workshop didn't come. We were thinking that many, many monastics who were maybe living on their own would come to this workshop. And instead, lay people came. Most of them were not living in a community situation. And then all the monastics who came were living in community. And then we actually didn't plan for the fact that I didn't, I'm sure the other people knew, no translation. So there are many, many groups of Korean and Vietnamese nuns sitting together. English was not their language. And so they had the fortitude to stay through the whole workshop. They had their cell phones, because that's how the other translation was happening. They had their dictionaries online, and they were working through this whole process, doing it like that. You know, it was just so touching to see this kind of fortitude. You know, they wanted to be there that much. So then there were a few sessions that addressed the very challenging topic of sexual abuse in spiritual communities. And what impressed me with that was that the presenters were very well informed. They gave the information without getting into emotional, reactivity. It was heard very much in a very calm manner. No one got on a soapbox to defend or, do anything else. And I thought I'd share just part of a paper that was presented by 2 nuns. One of the nuns is a Bhutanese nun. She's been a nun for 25 years, and she has her PhD, which she finished in 2017. And the other nun is a nun from Malaysia, and she practices in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. The paper is just stunning in its clarity, and it describes the challenges, but they also talk about solutions, as did all the other presentations. They weren't just the challenges mentioned. There were solutions. So I'm just going to share highlights of this paper. They studied 2 different monasteries, and so, of course, for privacy and safety, those monasteries aren't named, and the individuals they interviewed aren't named. That makes sense. So they start off the paper. Their presentation was Silent No More, Critical Review of Sexual Exploitation in Buddhist Practice. Instances of sexual abuse of women are not uncommon in the Himalayan region. It is perhaps too simplistic to correlate the sexual element in Tantric Buddhism and the numerous cases of sexual abuse of women in the Himalayas by male clergy. This paper is a critical analysis of the taboo subject of sexual harassment in the religious realm based on a doctoral dissertation on nuns in 2 nunneries in Bhutan. The primary purpose of this paper is to pave the way for a meaningful discussion on the rising incidence of sexual abuse in religious institutions in the hopes of finding effective and long-lasting solutions to this serious issue. The instances that we researched demonstrate that some monk teachers who should be teaching Dharma to the nuns and who should be beacons of morality are the ones who take advantage of the nuns. It is not fully clear if the sexual acts were consensual, but the fact that monks and nuns have to observe vows of celibacy. I didn't read that properly. It is not fully clear if the sexual acts were consensual, but the fact that monks and nuns have to observe vows of celibacy is taken very lightly by monks and nuns in Bhutan. One of the gravest dangers in placing monks or Gomchen teachers at nunneries is the scope for sexual abuse. So there's the big problem right there. They're having monks teaching nuns. So their first solution is, had nuns been sufficiently empowered to teach their own nuns and taught the monastic code of conduct, these incidences could have been curbed. Nuns dare not go against their teachers' wishes, paving the way for sexual exploitation by unscrupulous monks, many of whom are teachers and sometimes even directors of nunneries. Next problem. When a nun complains to the nunnery director, who's also usually a monk, instead of investigating the matter and punishing the monk teacher, the whistleblower nun is expelled. Apparently, the director in one case was having a clandestine affair of his own. For fear of exposing each other, the nunnery director expelled the nun to cover up the matter. Monastic authorities tend to protect the interest of monks rather than nuns. Another problem. Then they go on to say, even though the Vinaya is crystal clear that there is no offense for a nun who is raped, and the blame must lie with the rapist, there is still the burden of proof for women that the sexual act was not consensual. This is an uphill task because many incidences of sexual violation are a result of brainwashing by monk teachers citing that sexual relations with the guru is in accordance with the karma mudra. Moreover, most nuns hail from rural areas with minimal schooling, lack of exposure to secular legislation, and are clueless about what to do in the event of rape. There is neither any awareness raising on sexual harassment nor corresponding grievance mechanism in the 2 nunneries studied. Thus, the monastic body must formulate guidelines to protect nuns and lay female Dharma practitioners from sexual exploitation and educate them on their rights in prevention and post-trauma. So the monastic body should ensure that nuns and women in general understand that monks and lay practitioners cannot lure them into sexual relations for any reason whatsoever, even on the pretext of consort practice, which is the most often cited reason. Many women, nuns included, it seems cannot resist the prospects of being a human dakini. So they don't have education, they don't know their rights, they don't know the legal things, and then they're told this is going to really deeply impact their practice if they do this. So they're just, candidates for abuse. I should say the names of these nuns. I don't think I did. Sorry. So the authors of this paper are Venerable Dr. Tenzin Dadron and Venerable Dr. Karma Tashi Chudran. And Dr. Tenzin Dadron, she too experienced unwelcome advances by monks in India who tried to coerce her into becoming a tantric consort. They cited mutual benefits, saying that she would be helping the monk to attain enlightenment, and he would in turn lift her up spiritually. A prospect, she said, that she found repulsive, to say the least. Fortunately, she says, I was well aware of the criteria for tantric consort practice, and I know that it is forbidden for monks and nuns. If only the nuns knew the exact criteria and conditions for the karma mudra and had access to the Vinaya, incidences of sexual exploitation could have been nipped in the bud. This is why women need to be fully empowered in Buddhist education. And that was the main point that she was making in her paper. So I thought it was very courageous of her to do this. She has been given a lot of advice by Buddhist institutions in her own country not to talk about this. And yet she is going forward with this and, talking about it and really getting things in place so that nuns can be in charge of their own education. So that was just 2 examples of what went on at the conference. It was a very, very rich experience. People were just open. It was very easy to talk to people. Probably, I would say what was missing the most is that there was an intense time spent in listening to people present papers and not a whole lot of time for discussion in small groups. And so I think in the future, if anyone is interested in going to the conference, you should start saving now. I hope that the Abbey sends people in the future. I think the workshop format is wonderful. I think everyone who had the opportunity to meet in small groups and talk in our workshop are really glad for the possibility to connect like that. And the next conference is going to happen in Sarawak, Malaysia. So a really golden opportunity if you're interested in being in a group of practitioners that are mostly female and listening to the challenges and helping everyone come up with solutions to moving forward.